Chapter 3. The Eloquence of Monsieur de Vilmorin. As they walked down the hill together, Monsieur de Vilmorin was now silent and preoccupied, while André-Louis was talkative. He had chosen women as the subject for his current discourse. He unjustifiably claimed to have discovered women that morning, and the things he had to say about the sex were unflattering and occasionally almost gross. Monsieur de Vilmorin realized what the subject was and stopped listening. It may seem unusual for a young French abbé of his time, but Monsieur de Vilmorin was not interested in women. Poor Philippe was exceptional in several ways. Opposite the Bread and Arm, which was the inn and posting house at the entrance of the village of Gavrillac, Monsieur de Vilmorin interrupted his companion just as he was soaring to the dizziest heights of caustic insults. This brought André-Louis back to reality, and he noticed the carriage of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur standing before the door of the inn.
"I do not believe you have been listening to me,"
he said.
"If you had been less interested in what you were saying, you might have noticed it sooner and spared your breath. The truth is that you disappoint me, André. You seem to have forgotten why we went there. I have an appointment here with the Marquis. He desires to hear me further on the matter. I could accomplish nothing up there at Gavrillac. The time happened to be poorly chosen, but I have hopes for the Marquis." "Hopes for what?" "I hope that he will make whatever reparation lies in his power and provide for the widow and the orphans. Why else would he desire to hear me further?" "That is unusual condescension,"
André-Louis said, and he quoted,
"I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts." "Why?"
Philippe asked.
"Let us go and find out, unless you think that I shall be in the way."
The host ushered the young men into a room on the right, which was kept private for the Marquis as long as he chose to honor it. A fire of logs was burning brightly at the far end of the room. The Marquis de la Tour d'Azur and his cousin, the Chevalier de Chabrelaine, sat beside it. Both men rose as Monsieur de Vilmorin came in. André-Louis followed him and paused to close the door.
"You oblige me by your prompt courtesy, Monsieur de Vilmorin,"
the Marquis said. His tone was so cold that it contradicted the politeness of his words.
"Please take a chair. Ah, Moreau?"
His tone was frigidly questioning.
"He accompanies you, sir?"
he asked.
"If you please, Marquis." "Why not? Find yourself a seat, Moreau."
He spoke over his shoulder as if talking to a servant.
"It is good of you, sir,"
Philippe said,
"to offer me this opportunity to continue the subject that took me so fruitlessly to Gavrillac."
The Marquis crossed his legs and held one of his fine hands to the fire. He replied without bothering to turn to the young man, who was slightly behind him.
"We will leave the goodness of my request out of the question for the moment,"
he said darkly, and Monsieur de Chabrelaine laughed. André-Louis thought the Chevalier was easily moved to laughter and almost envied his ability.
"But I am grateful,"
Philippe insisted,
"that you condescend to hear me plead their cause."
The Marquis stared at him over his shoulder.
"Whose cause?"
he asked.
"Why, the cause of the widow and orphans of this unfortunate maybe."
The Marquis looked from Vilmorin to the Chevalier, and the Chevalier laughed again and slapped his leg this time. "I think,"
the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur said slowly,
"that we misunderstand each other. I asked you to come here. The Château de Gavrillac was not a good place to continue our talk. Also, I did not want to trouble you. It would have been a long trip for you to Azur. But my purpose is connected to certain expressions that you used up there. I want to hear more about those expressions. Sir, please tell me more." André-Louis began to realize that there was something sinister in the air. He was a man of quick intuition, far quicker than Monsieur de Vilmorin, who showed no more than a mild surprise.
"I am confused, sir,"
he said.
"What expressions are you referring to?"
"It seems that I must refresh your memory, sir."
The Marquis crossed his legs. He swung sideways on his chair. Now he faced Monsieur de Vilmorin directly.
"You spoke very eloquently, sir. Even if you were mistaken, you spoke almost too eloquently. You talked about the infamy of a certain deed. This was an act of summary justice. It was done to this thieving fellow maybe, or whatever his name may be. Infamy was the precise word you used. You did not take back that word. I told you that my gamekeeper Binet acted under my orders.
If the deed was infamous,
Monsieur de Vilmorin said,
its infamy is not lessened by the rank of the person responsible, no matter how exalted. Rather, it is worsened. Ah,
the Marquis said, and he drew a gold snuff-box from his pocket.
you say if the deed was infamous, sir. Am I to understand that you are no longer as convinced of its infamy as you appeared to be?
Monsieur de Vilmorin's handsome face wore a look of confusion. He did not understand the direction of this conversation.
It occurs to me, Marquis, in view of your readiness to assume responsibility, that you must believe there is a justification for the deed that is not apparent to me.
That is better. That is distinctly better.
The Marquis took snuff delicately. He dusted the fragments from the fine lace at his throat.
You must realize this. You may have jumped to unfair conclusions. This is because you do not fully understand these matters. Also, you are not a landowner yourself. That is indeed the case. May it be a warning to you, sir. Similar thefts have annoyed me for months. When I tell you that, you will perhaps understand. It became necessary to use a strong deterrent. This was to stop them. I do not think anyone will prowl in my woods anymore. They now know the risk. And there is more to it than that, Monsieur de Vilmorin. The poaching does not annoy me as much as the contempt for my absolute and undeniable rights. You must have noticed something, sir. There is an evil spirit of disobedience in the air. There is only one way to deal with it. We cannot tolerate it even slightly. We cannot show any leniency. If we do, we will need even harsher measures tomorrow. I am sure you understand me. I am also sure you appreciate my explanation. It is condescending of me to explain. I cannot admit that I owed you any explanations. If anything I have said is still unclear to you, I refer you to the game laws. Your lawyer friend there will explain them to you if necessary. The gentleman swung around again to face the fire. He seemed to imply that the interview was over. However, this was not the message it conveyed to the watchful, puzzled, and vaguely uneasy André-Louis. He thought it was a very curious and suspicious speech. It pretended to explain things. It used polite words and a deliberately insolent tone. This could only provoke a man with Monsieur de Vilmorin's opinions. And that is exactly what it did. He stood up.
Are there no laws in the world but game laws?
He demanded angrily.
Have you never heard of the laws of humanity by any chance?
The Marquis sighed wearily.
What do I have to do with the laws of humanity?
He wondered. Monsieur de Vilmorin looked at him for a moment in speechless amazement.
Nothing, Marquis. That is unfortunately too obvious. I hope you will remember it when you wish to appeal to those same laws that you now mock.
The Marquis de la Tour d'Azur threw his head back sharply, and his aristocratic face looked commanding.
Now what exactly does that mean? It is not the first time today that you have used dark phrases that I could almost interpret as a veiled threat. It is not a threat, Marquis, but a warning. It is a warning that such deeds against God's creatures. Oh, you may sneer, sir, but they are God's creatures, just like you or me. This is neither more nor less true, even though the thought may deeply wound your pride. In his eyes, out of charity, spare me a sermon, Monsieur l'Abbé. You mock me, sir. You laugh. I wonder if you will laugh when God presents his reckoning to you for the blood and plunder that fill your hands? Sir.
The word came sharp as the crack of a whip from Monsieur de Chabrolaine, who leaped to his feet. But the Marquis instantly stopped him.
Sit down, Chevalier. You are interrupting the Abbé, and I would like to hear him further. He interests me profoundly.
In the background, André-Louis had also stood up, alarmed by the evil he saw written on the handsome face of the Marquis de la Tour d'Azur. He approached his friend and touched his arm.
We had better go, Philippe,
he said. But Monsieur de Vilmorin was caught in the relentless grip of passions he had repressed for a long time. He was being carried along recklessly.
Oh, sir,
he said.
Consider what you are and what you will be. Consider how you and your kind live by abuses, and consider the harvest that these abuses must ultimately bring. Revolutionist,
The Marquis said contemptuously.
you have the nerve to stand before me and offer this foul, hypocritical nonsense from your modern so-called intellectuals. Is it nonsense, sir? Do you think and believe in your soul that it is nonsense? Is it nonsense that the feudal grip is on all living things, crushing them like grapes in a press for its own profit? Does it not exercise its rights on the river waters, on the fire that bakes the poor man's bread of grass and barley, on the wind that turns the mill? The peasant cannot take a step on the road, cross a rickety bridge over a river, or buy a yard of cloth in the village market without facing feudal greed and being taxed in feudal dues. Is that not enough, Marquis? Must you also demand his wretched life in payment for the slightest violation of your sacred privileges? Uncaring of the widows or orphans, you plunge into misery. Will nothing satisfy you unless your shadow lies like a curse across the land? And do you proudly think that France, this suffering nation, will endure it forever?
He paused as if waiting for an answer, but none came. The Marquis looked at him in strange silence. A faint smile of disdain touched the corners of his lips, and there was an ominous hardness in his eyes. André-Louis tugged at his friend's sleeve again.
Philippe.
Philippe shook him off and plunged on fanatically.
Do you see nothing of the gathering clouds that signal the coming storm? You perhaps imagine that the States General called by Monsieur Necker, which is promised for next year, will only invent new ways of extortion to pay off the bankruptcy of the state. You deceive yourselves, and you will soon find out. You despise the Third Estate. It will prove to be the dominant force, and it will find a way to destroy this disease of privilege that is eating away at the heart of this unfortunate country.
The Marquis shifted in his chair and finally spoke.
You have a very dangerous gift of eloquence, sir,
He said.
And it reflects more on you than on your subject. After all, what are you offering me? You offer a reheated version of the ideas served to poor enthusiasts in provincial literary clubs, mixed with the writings of your Voltaires and Jean-Jacques and similar dirty-fingered writers. Not one among all your philosophers has the intelligence to understand that we are an order established by antiquity, that we have the authority of centuries behind our rights and privileges. Humanity, sir,
Philippe replied.
is older than nobility. Human rights are as old as mankind itself.
The Marquis laughed and shrugged.
That is the answer I might have expected. It has the exact tone of hypocritical nonsense that distinguishes the philosophers.
And then Monsieur de Chaberlain spoke.
You are taking a very long way around.
He criticized his cousin with a note of impatience.
But I am getting there.
The Marquis answered.
I wanted to be absolutely certain first. By my faith, you should have no doubt by now. I have none.
The Marquis stood up and turned back to Monsieur de Vilmorin, who had understood nothing of that brief exchange.
Monsieur l'Abbé,
He said once more.
you have a very dangerous gift of eloquence. I can imagine men being swayed by it. If you had been born a gentleman, you would not have so easily acquired these false views that you express.
Monsieur de Vilmorin stared blankly, unable to understand.
Did you say if I had been born a gentleman?
He asked in a slow and bewildered voice.
But I was born a gentleman. My family is as old and my blood is as good as yours, sir.
The Marquis slightly raised his eyebrows and gave a vague and indulgent smile. His dark and liquid eyes looked directly into the face of Monsieur de Vilmorin.
I am afraid you have been deceived about that. Deceived? Your sentiments reveal the indiscretion that your mother must have committed.
The brutally insulting words were spoken beyond recall. The lips that had uttered them coldly, as if stating the most ordinary fact, remained calm and faintly sneering. A dead silence followed. André-Louis's mind went numb. He stood horrified, and all thought stopped within him. Meanwhile, Monsieur de Vilmorin kept his eyes fixed on the Marquis de la Tour-d'Azur, as if searching for a meaning that escaped him. Quite suddenly, he understood the vile insult. The blood rushed to his face, and fire blazed in his gentle eyes. A convulsive tremor shook his body. Then, with an inarticulate cry, he leaned forward and struck the Marquis hard on his sneering face with his open hand. In a flash, Monsieur de Chabrolaine was on his feet between the two men. André-Louis saw the trap too late. La Tour d'Azur's words were just a move in a game of chess. They were calculated to anger his opponent into making a counter move like this, which left him entirely at the other man's mercy. The Marquis looked on. He was very pale, except where Monsieur de Vilmorin's fingerprints slowly began to color his face, but he said nothing more. Instead, it was Monsieur de Chabrolaine who now did the talking, taking up his prearranged part in this wicked game.
You realize what you have done, sir?
He said coldly to Philippe.
And you realize, of course, what must inevitably follow.
Monsieur de Vilmorin had realized nothing. The poor young man had acted on impulse and out of an instinct for decency and honor, without ever considering the consequences. But he realized them now at the sinister invitation of Monsieur de Chabrolaine. He wanted to avoid these consequences out of respect for his priestly calling, which strictly forbade the kind of duel that Monsieur de Chabrolaine was clearly forcing upon him. He stepped back.
Let one insult wipe out the other,
he said in a dull voice.
The balance is still in the Marquis's favor. Let that satisfy him. Impossible.
The Chevalier's lips pressed tightly together. After that, he was completely smooth but very firm.
A blow has been struck, sir. I believe I am correct in saying that such a thing has never happened to the Marquis in his entire life. If you felt insulted, you only had to ask for the satisfaction due from one gentleman to another. Your action seems to confirm the assumption that you found so offensive. But that does not make you immune from the consequences.
You see, it was Monsieur de Chabrolaine's role to throw fuel on this fire and make absolutely sure that their victim could not escape them.
I desire no immunity.
The young seminarian snapped back, stung by this fresh provocation. After all, he was of noble birth, and the traditions of his class strongly influenced him. They were far stronger than his seminary training in humility. He owed it to himself and his honor to be killed rather than avoid the consequences of what he had done.
But he does not wear a sword, gentlemen.
André-Louis cried out in horror.
That is easily fixed. He may borrow mine. Gentlemen,
André-Louis insisted, caught between fear for his friend and indignation.
That it is not his habit to wear a sword. He has never worn one, and he is untrained in its use. He is a seminarian and a candidate for holy orders. He is already half a priest, and he is therefore forbidden from taking part in the kind of fight you propose. He should have remembered all that before he struck a blow.
Monsieur de Chabrolaine said politely.
The blow was deliberately provoked.
André-Louis raged. Then he regained control of himself, although the other man's haughty stare played no part in his recovery.
Oh my God! I talk in vain. How can one argue against a plan that has already been decided? Come away, Philippe. Do you not see the trap?
Monsieur de Vilmorin cut him short and pushed him away.
Be quiet, André. The Marquis is entirely in the right. The Marquis is in the right?
André-Louis let his arms fall helplessly. This man whom he loved more than anyone else in the world was caught in the trap of the world's madness. He was offering his chest to the knife for the sake of a vague and distorted sense of his own honor. It was not that he failed to see the trap. It was that his honor forced him to refuse to consider it. In that moment, he seemed to André-Louis to be a uniquely tragic figure. He was perhaps noble, but he was very pitiful. Chapter 4. The Heritage. M. de Vilmorin wanted to settle the matter immediately. He was driven by both practical and personal reasons. He was struggling with emotions that conflicted deeply with his priestly calling. He was eager to get it over with. This way, he could return to a more appropriate state of mind. He was also a little afraid of himself. His sense of honor feared his own natural instincts. His education and long-term goals had stripped away much of his aggressive toughness. This toughness was usually expected of men. He had grown as timid and gentle as a woman. He knew this, so he was afraid. His initial flash of anger might fade. Then he might show a shameful weakness during the duel. The Marquis, on his side, was equally eager for an immediate fight, since they had M. de Chamberlain to act as a second for his cousin, André-Louis to serve as a witness for M. de Vilmorin. There was no reason to delay. Within a few minutes, all the arrangements were made. The sinister little group of four gathered in the afternoon sunshine on the bowling green behind the inn. They were completely isolated, hidden from the windows of the house by a thick screen of trees. Even without leaves, the branches were dense enough to provide effective cover. There were no formal measurements of swords or careful selection of the ground. The Marquis took off his sword belt and scabbard. However, he refused to take off his shoes or coat, because he did not consider his opponent significant enough to justify the effort. He was tall, athletic, and flexible, and he stood facing the equally tall, but very delicate and fragile M. de Vilmorin. M. de Vilmorin also refused to make any of the usual preparations. He knew that taking off his coat would not help him, so he stepped into his fighting stance fully dressed. Two bright red spots burned on his cheekbones against his otherwise pale gray face. M. de Chamberlain leaned on a cane because he had given his sword to M. de Vilmorin. He watched the scene with quiet interest. André-Louis stood facing him on the other side of the fighters. He was the palest of the four. He stared with feverish eyes and constantly twisted his sweaty hands together. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to throw himself between the fighters and stop the duel. However, he held back that sensible urge because he knew it would be useless. To calm himself, he clung to the belief that the outcome would not be truly serious. Philippe's honor forced him to fight the man who had struck him. At the same time, the Marquis's noble birth surely prevented him from seriously hurting the inexperienced young man he had provoked. After all, the Marquis was a man of honor. He probably just wanted to teach Philippe a lesson. It might be a harsh lesson, but Philippe would certainly live to learn from it. André-Louis clung stubbornly to that comforting thought. Steel clashed against steel, and the men engaged in combat. The Marquis turned his body sideways to present a narrow target. His knees were slightly bent, acting like living springs. In contrast, M. de Vilmorin stood squarely facing his opponent, offering a full target with his knees locked straight. Both honor and the spirit of fair play protested against such an unequal match. The fight was very short, as expected. During his youth, Philippe had received the basic fencing lessons given to every boy of his social class. He knew the basic movements expected of him. However, those simple skills were useless against the Marquis. They exchanged 3 quick sword movements. Then, without any rushing, the Marquis slid his right foot forward along the wet grass. His tall, graceful body extended in a long lunge that slipped easily under M. de Vilmorin's clumsy defense. With absolute calm and deliberate focus, the Marquis drove his blade straight into the young man's stomach. André-Louis sprang forward just in time to catch his friend under the arms as he collapsed. The weight of his friend made his own legs buckle, and he sank down until he was kneeling on the wet grass. Philippe's limp head rested against his left shoulder. Philippe's relaxed arms hung uselessly by his sides. Blood welled up and bubbled from the terrible wound, quickly soaking the poor young man's clothes. With a pale face and trembling lips, André-Louis looked up at the Marquis. The nobleman stood there, watching his own work with an expression of serious but completely remorseless interest.
You have killed him.
André-Louis cried out.
Of course.
The Marquis replied. The Marquis carefully wiped his blade with a lace handkerchief. As he let the delicate cloth drop to the ground, he explained his actions.
I told him he had a very dangerous gift for speaking.
He then turned away, leaving André-Louis in complete understanding. While still holding his friend's bleeding, lifeless body, the young man shouted after him.
Come back, you cowardly murderer, and make yourself completely safe by killing me too.
The Marquis stopped and turned halfway around, his face dark with anger. Then M. de Chamberlain placed a restraining hand on his cousin's arm. Even though the Chevalier had helped arrange the duel, He was slightly horrified now that the deed was actually done. He did not share the cold, ruthless nature of the Marquis, and he was much younger.
Let's go.
De Chamberlain said.
The boy is raving mad. They were close friends. Did you hear what he said to me?
The Marquis demanded.
Neither you nor any other man can deny it.
André-Louis shouted back.
You confessed it yourself, sir, when you just told me why you killed him. You killed him because you were afraid of him. Even if that were true, what of it?
The wealthy nobleman asked coldly. Do you really have to ask? Do you understand nothing about life? Do you understand nothing about humanity? You only know how to wear a nice coat. You only know how to style your hair. Oh yes, and how to use weapons against boys and priests. Do you have no mind to think with? Do you have no soul to examine? Do I really have to tell you? It is a coward's choice. A coward kills the thing he fears. It is doubly cowardly to kill someone in this manner. If you had stabbed him in the back with a knife, if you had done it in a dark alley, at least then you would have shown true courage. You would have shown the courage of your own wickedness. It would have been an honest, undisguised crime. But you were afraid of the consequences of an assassination. You had all your power, but you were still afraid. So you hid your cowardice behind the excuse of a formal duel. The Marquis angrily shook off his cousin's hand and took a step forward. He now held his sword as if it were a riding whip. But the Chevalier grabbed him again and held him back.
No, Gervais. Let it go in God's name. Let him come, sir.
André-Louis raged, his voice thick with intense hatred.
Let him finish his coward's work on me. Then he can make himself completely safe from a coward's punishment.
De Chamberlain let go of his cousin. The Marquis was pale with fury, and he glared at the young man who was insulting him so recklessly. But then he stopped himself. Perhaps he suddenly remembered the rumor about who this young man's father really was. Everyone believed he was related to the Lord of Gavrillac, and it was well known that the Lord loved him dearly. The Marquis probably realized that if he pushed the situation any further, he would be trapped in a terrible dilemma. He would have to choose between spilling more blood and making an enemy of the Lord of Gavrillac, just when he desperately needed that gentleman's friendship. His other choice was to walk away and swallow the insult, which would damage his pride and weaken his authority in the local area. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that he stopped abruptly. He let out an angry, incoherent sound that mixed rage with contempt. Then he threw up his arms in disgust, turned on his heel, and walked away quickly with his cousin. When the innkeeper and his staff finally arrived, they found André-Louis holding the body of his dead friend. He was murmuring passionately into the deaf ear that rested almost against his lips.
Philippe, speak to me. Philippe, can't you hear me? God in heaven. Philippe.
The innkeeper and his people saw at a single glance that no doctor or priest could help him now. The cheek resting against André-Louis's face was a terrible leaden gray color. His half-open eyes were completely glazed over, and a small trail of bloody foam trickled from his slightly parted lips. André-Louis stumbled blindly after the men as they carried the body into the inn, his eyes completely blurred with tears. They placed the body on a bed in a small upstairs room. He knelt down beside the bed and grabbed the dead man's hand in both of his own. Filled with helpless rage, he swore to his friend that the Marquis would pay a bitter price for this murder.
He was afraid of your voice, Philippe.
André-Louis whispered.
If I cannot get justice for this terrible crime, then his murder will at least be completely useless to him. The exact thing he feared in you, he will soon fear in me. He was terrified that you would use your powerful words to turn people against monsters like him. Well, people will still be swayed by your words. I am taking your eloquence and your arguments as my inheritance from you. I will make them my own. It does not matter that I do not believe in your gospel of freedom. I know every single word of it, and that is all that matters for our purpose now. If all else fails, your thoughts will find a voice in my living tongue. By doing this, we will at least frustrate his vile goal of silencing the voice he feared. Having your blood on his soul will do him absolutely no good. Your voice would never have hunted him down as relentlessly as my voice will, if everything else fails.
It was a dark, Triumphant thought. The idea calmed him down and soothed his immediate grief, and he began to pray very softly. But then his heart trembled as a terrible thought struck him. Philippe was a man of peace. He was almost a priest and a true apostle of Christianity. Yet he had died and gone to face his Maker with the sin of burning anger on his soul. It was a horrible thought. However, God would surely understand that his anger was righteous and justified. No matter how men interpreted the divine rules, André-Louis firmly believed that one single sin of anger could never outweigh all the loving goodness Philippe had practiced throughout his life. His great heart had always been completely pure. After all, André-Louis thought to himself, God was not a cruel, arrogant nobleman.